Welcome back to Decades of Dominance Fantasy Football Strategy with Sean and Joe. We're going to cover our best ball draft, 20 rounds, quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, tight end, defense, special teams. Like I said, 20 bench spots, so it's going to be deep, 12 teams, PPR. And round one, I'll go through we're going to display the picks. McCaffrey, Thomas, Barkley, Lamar Jackson went early, Pat Mahomes, Ezekiel Elliott. That's Sean's pick at 6. Kamara, Cook, Henry, Adams, Mixon, and Hopkins. So, Sean, you had the pick at 6. McCaffrey, Thomas, Barkley already gone. And then, surprisingly, 2 quarterbacks. So, you took Elliott. What do you think?
Yeah, so like you said, well, there are 20 total spots, not 20 bench spots, just for clarification, and no
Right.
flex, like you said earlier. So yeah, I was pretty surprised at the 6th spot. I was pretty happy when I got that spot on random because I was guaranteed one of the top 5 running backs or Michael Thomas. I thought my decision would be made for me. Obviously, with the 2 quarterbacks going early, it wasn't. I think the only reason Zeke lasted this long is when we did this draft, it was shortly after the news came out about him testing positive for COVID. But I think by the time the season rolls around, if it rolls around, that's not going to be a factor. So I felt pretty happy to get Zeke here at 6 with his extremely high floor. He does it all, catches the ball, scores the touchdowns, a true feature back. So to get him at 6 is pretty lucky in my opinion.
Agreed. And I would guess that a lot of those injury concerns and durability concerns factor into people's decisions. The fact that you cannot go and get a quarterback on waivers, you can't get somebody on waivers later on. You've got to build your team perfectly in the draft. So people make different choices. After Elliott, Kamara went, and then Dalvin Cook. There we go. The next, so the top 5 backs were gone. I took Derrick Henry at 9. Derrick Henry doesn't catch passes, so not great for a PPR league. But he is the focal point of the offense. He does score a lot of touchdowns. He has incredible games. And he does have week winning games, which is something I wanted in a best ball league, to where, when Henry goes off for 40 points, he counts for me. And when he doesn't, one of my other running backs is going to count. After Henry, Devontae Adams, Mixon, and Hopkins. What do you think of Henry at 9?
I would have gone that way as well. I know if I were you sitting at that spot, I would have really hoped that Kamara or Cook would have fallen one spot further. But Henry, which is the number 6 running back on my board as well, even in PPR with his lack of receptions, because he is such a beast running the ball. I also worry about he hasn't shown any problems with durability, but he has had a lot of carries, a lot of touches the last few years. So that is a concern that he could break down at some point. But I think it's a wise pick in this format. There's 2 things you got to look at. Like you said, it's nice not having to guess when these guys are going to have their good weeks and when they're going to have their down weeks. But the flip side of that coin is also, like you said, once you draft this team, it's done. If a guy ends up being a dud, you can't replace him. You can't just stash him on your bench. For all intents and purposes, everybody on your roster is part of your lineup each week, and you just get the best one. So, but I do agree with the Henry pick at 9. That's probably the way I would have gone as well.
So we should move on to round 2, but before we do, real quick, any big surprises or values you saw here in round 1, disappointments, reaches?
Even in this format, I think the 2 quarterbacks, even though they are the top 2 quarterbacks, went way too early. You can get decent production in your quarterback spot a lot easier later in the draft than you can at running back. So to give up one of those top 5 running backs to get one of the top 2 quarterbacks was a mistake, in my opinion. Time will tell.
Sure. I wouldn't have wanted to have been picking at the 11th spot. I'm not sure that Mixon is going to be better than some of the other running backs that'll be picked later, but we can cover those when we get to them. I do like DeAndre Hopkins at pick 12. I think he's going to have a potential to have, if he makes chemistry with Kyler Murray, he's going to have a good year. So let's look at round 2. We have Tyreek Hill, then George Kittle, which I think is great. Travis Kelce, another great pick. I took Kenyon Drake with the 4th pick of round 2. Then Miles Sanders went. Great pick at that position. Deshaun Watson, and then you took Eckler. We had Godwin, Chubb, Prescott, Jones, and Jacobs. So covering, I'm not surprised that the tight ends went, because Kittle and Kelce are 30 to 50 points better than the next tight end available, at least based on last year's stats. And Kittle only had 5 touchdowns last year. So when it came to me, I liked Kenyon Drake for how he was playing the last 4 or 5 games last year. If you multiply out his production, he has the potential to be an RB1. So I took Kenyon Drake here. Thoughts?
Yeah, after the top 5 running backs, I actually strongly considered Dalvin Cook with my pick, even with Ezekiel Elliott on the board back in the first round. But after those first 5 running backs, Kenyon Drake is in the same tier with Henry and the guys that went just after. I actually do like the Mixon pick at 11. He is my 7th back. But I would have gone with Miles Sanders, the pick that went just after you, over Kenyon Drake. But for the most part, it's a coin flip.
I like both of those guys. I would have been happy with either one of them. I took Drake. Yeah, kind of on a coin flip. I think it's possible that Arizona's going to need to score more points and maybe be in a few less defensive struggles. So that was the tiebreaker for me. After Miles Sanders, who you talked about, we had Deshaun Watson as the 3rd quarterback, I guess, following the quarterback fever. And then you took Eckler here.
Yeah, again, Watson is I do like him, and I'm fine with him being the 3rd quarterback taken, but not at the 18th overall pick. That is just way too early with the talent that's left on the board. I do very much agree with the tight ends early in round 2. I would have gone with one of those 2 guys had they fallen here. But since they were gone, when I was on the clock, I was having a hard time deciding between Austin Eckler, the running back, and Julio Jones, the wide receiver. Ultimately, I went with running back for position value. Eckler was still able to produce even when Miles Gordon came back, and he's just such a PPR monster. I think a lot of the Chargers are being overly knocked down in rankings because of the loss of Phillip Rivers, but Phillip Rivers played very badly last year. I actually think that Tyrod Taylor and eventually the rookie are going to end up playing just as good, if not better, than Rivers played last year. So
Sure, and with even with a limited quarterback dump-off passes are popular.
Right.
I'm not sure I love the next pick. Godwin, it could be due for some regression. Brady's coming in, new quarterback, a lot of targets. Godwin was a sort of I don't want to say a sleeper, but he was a guy last year projected to be way more valuable than his draft pick. I think this year he is at or higher than his likely production. So I probably would have gone with Julio Jones here, like you talked about. Nick Chubb comes next. He's going to lose a lot of passes in the Cleveland offense. When his numbers went down after he started sharing carries last year. And then another quarterback, Dak Prescott. Julio Jones, great pick at the end of round 2, and Josh Jacobs, another great pick at the end of round 2. He may not be your favorite running back, but to take him with the 24th overall pick, I think is reasonable. What do you think of this round? Any big surprises here?
I like the Tyreek Hill pick at 201 a lot better than the Hopkins pick at 112. Although, I mean, technically it's the same team, so it didn't really matter which one they picked first. I just worry about Hopkins going to a new team. A lot of times when wide receivers do that, their production drops off very much. Godwin, I agree with a lot of what you were saying. I think that he was value priced last year around probably 4th, 5th round, and you got first round production out of him. This year, I think he's due for some regression. I don't think he's the most talented wide receiver on that team, although he might be the one that fits in with Brady's current arm strength the best. So time will tell on that one. Nick Chubb is kind of similar to me to Henry, although Nick Chubb, I don't think there's a running back in the league that's good enough to keep Hunt on the bench, unfortunately.
Right.
So that severely limits Chubb's upside. And Prescott as the 4th quarterback at 210 is just a huge reach. I love, the Julio pick at 211's got to be one of the best value picks at this point. And Josh Jacobs, as a Raider fan, while I really love, he ran hard for us and he made something out of nothing a lot. My big issue with him is while the Raiders say they want to get him more involved in the passing game, their actions are speaking a lot louder than their words. They have Rashard on the roster, who is a pass-catching running back. They spent the 80th overall draft pick on Lynn Bowden, who they're saying is going to be a running back, joker, gadget-type player. They also fairly recently signed Booker from Denver, who has never been anything but a third down receiving back. So they're bringing in all these other pass catching running backs. I don't know how they're going to throw the ball to them and get Josh Jacobs more involved in the passing game.
Yeah, well, I hear you. Moving on to round 3, Russell Wilson, I think another big reach at the top of round 3. I suppose just to fall in line with the early run on quarterbacks, not wanting to be left out, but I still wouldn't have done that. Aaron Jones, I think a good pick in round 3. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, boy, I love this pick at 303. Cooper Kupp, another good pick. DJ Moore, and then you took Mike Evans, which is an awesome pick, but I'll let you talk about your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, again, the quarterbacks, just people seem to catch the fever, and I don't know, maybe they panicked once they saw their guys going off the board and figured they had to get one. I think Aaron Jones is due for a big regression, especially in the touchdowns from where he had last year.
Agreed.
But you don't see him fall to the 3rd round in most drafts.
Agreed.
So it's hard to argue with his value there. I do love Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would have been tempted to go 3 for 3 and running back, even though we don't have a flex position in this league, but he was taken before I could get him, probably for the betterment of my team. I really like Cooper Kupp, although he did tail off at the end of last year, and Woods looked like he might be the number 1 receiver. Looked like he might be retaking that role for the Rams. Who knows? I still think it's Kupp, but we'll see. I do really like DJ Moore, the player. I do like my pick of Mike Evans a little bit better. I think he is supremely talented. I think he's the most talented receiver on this team. We'll see how he meshes with Brady. We'll also see how defenses react to the Godwin-Evans combo now that they've had a whole offseason to look at it. Is Godwin going to take away some of maybe Godwin gets the top corner or the double coverage and Evans gets one-on-one man-to-man, and he will just eat that up. So pretty happy to get him in the middle of the 3rd round.
Right, and I want to keep round 3 moving, but to add to I think Mike Evans is a tremendous pick here for various reasons. One of them being that he is one of those alpha wide receivers that dominates games, and when he gets a bad matchup, Mike Evans can put up 3 touchdowns and be a week winner for you. I'll compare and contrast him a little bit with the next wide receiver taken, Allen Robinson, who's an excellent wide receiver, caught a lot of balls last year, but in an anemic offense and not necessarily dominating for red zone targets. Allen Robinson is going to get you regular points, but Mike Evans can be a week winner. So when he is a week winner, Best Ball League is going to count him, and when he's not, one of your other wide receivers can rise to the top. So you want those guys that are going to be able to put up monster weeks. Allen Robinson does have great weeks, but it's more like 9 catches for 105 yards and maybe a touchdown, which is good. Mike Evans is 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. The next guy off the board is the guy I would have taken with the 9th pick of the 3rd round, Mark Andrews, but he went with the 8th pick of the 3rd round, so I took Zach Ertz instead. Ertz has been hurt, but I had him as my 4th best tight end. I wanted a top tight end in this league, so I took him here. I already have 2 solid running backs, and didn't feel like I could go wrong taking Ertz.
Yeah, with 2 solid running backs already on your team, I think it was between Ertz and the next pick, Golladay, for you at wide receiver. I don't blame you for taking Ertz. I think him and Andrews are that second tier of tight ends, just below the 2 studs that went early in round 2. I had Allen Robinson on a team last year, and I don't ever remember being that impressed with him. But he did okay. One thing I want to point out real quick, Mike Evans, even though he was the 2nd best receiver on his team, was still the 5th best wide receiver in points per game last year. Allen Robinson was 13th. So, I mean, which isn't terrible, but
I just wanted to add that. Trubisky wasn't throwing touchdowns. I do love the Golladay pick. I don't know if I really like Juju or Beckham better than some of the wide receivers that went in round 4. I thought, as you would, I'm sure, agree, I thought Wilson was a reach. Juju and Beckham, I'm not feeling great about. Every other pick I thought was solid. What about you?
Yeah, other than the quarterbacks, Juju, I think people are willing to give him too much of a free pass because Roethlisberger was hurt last year. Good wide receivers find a way to produce, maybe not at quite the same level, but they don't drop off as much as Juju did without Ben last year. I mean, he was terrible.
Case in point, Allen Robinson.
He was 56th, right. Juju Smith-Schuster was the 56th best wide receiver in points per game last year. 56th.
And he dropped a lot of passes that he could have caught.
Right. So. Yeah. No matter who they were coming from. Beckham is the name that everybody recognizes, but Beckham and Landry kind of remind me of the duo that the Raiders had a few years ago with Crabtree and Cooper. And Cooper was the big name, and he would have the bigger games, but for the most part, Crabtree would outscore him most weeks. I think it's the same thing in Cleveland. Beckham's a big name, but Landry actually ends up outscoring him. So we'll see.
Let's take a look at round 4. Still at the top of round 4 with Leonard Fournette, then Amari Cooper and A.J. Brown. I would have likely taken either of those guys before I took Beckham because of their ability to have a monster game. Then I took Robert Woods with the 4th pick. I had a couple of other receivers that were on a coin flip at this point. Thielen was one, but I was a little worried about his back injuries, getting through a full season in a best ball league. Considered Tyler Lockett at this point. After that, let's talk about the Robert Woods pick. You probably see some other receivers that you might have taken in this spot. Kind of a dart throw.
Yeah, but Woods is again in the same tier as these guys, so I don't consider it a huge reach or anything. I would have probably gone differently. I would have actually taken the guy that I did end up taking a couple picks later. But had I gone with Julio Jones in the second round, I would have been very happy to take Leonard Fournette in the middle of the third with my 306 pick. So this guy getting him at the top of round 4 is just a steal at this point. Yeah, there's some, will he – maybe the Jaguars are trying to get rid of him and whatnot, but at this point I don't think that's going to happen, and he was a beast for them last year. Cooper is way up and down for Dallas. Not as bad as he was for the Raiders, but he is still pretty much up and down, although top of the 4th round, usually he's drafted higher than this. I think this is pretty good value for him. A.J. Brown, I love. He was a stud as a rookie. I think that's a good spot for him.
I think both of those guys have the potential to have week-winning games. I know for sure Cooper does. He'll disappear on you, but that's why you're going to have some depth at the wide receiver pick position if you pick him. I think the next pick, pick number 5 in round 4, is probably the worst pick because he's not even my next best quarterback available, although he's not a bad quarterback, Josh Allen. And then we see Taylor go, and then you take Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I agree with Allen, Josh Allen. He's just below this next tier of – so there's the tier of the 2 quarterbacks with Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, and then there's a next tier with 4 guys, Kyler Murray still being on the board, and then I have Josh Allen at the top of the next tier of those guys. So again, all these quarterbacks are going way too early, in my opinion. But this is something that happens in real drafts as opposed to mock drafts. That's why I like these best ball drafts, because they actually do end up being more similar to real drafts. People will wait on quarterbacks and tight ends a lot longer in mock drafts than they will when it's actually their team and they have to field a starting lineup. Just something to keep in mind. Jonathan Taylor, I don't necessarily love him at this spot. I don't hate him either. There's just so much competition for not only carries in that backfield with Marlon Mack, but also with receptions with Nyheim Hines. So I don't know. But he was supremely talented coming out of college. You can look back at our rookie draft to hear more thoughts about Jonathan Taylor. I took Keenan Allen here. It was between him and Thielen for me. I was actually surprised you didn't take Thielen back at 404. But I also pass on Thielen because Keenan Allen is just a beast. He can take over games. And I think the changing quarterback, again, isn't going to hurt him as much as most people seem to think it is. So I was happy to get him here.
I'll quickly cover the rest of this round, and we'll wrap this up with our final thoughts. I thought Jonathan Taylor and Gurley represent a similar risk. Taylor being a rookie with competition, and Gurley being on a new team with potentially arthritic issues in his knees. So in one case, you've got an injury risk and a system learning risk. In another case, you've got, a rookie and also system learning. So it's sort of you're just throwing a dart either way and hoping you get RB1 production out of either one of those guys. Stephon Diggs, being on a new team with a lot of competition, I would have taken Thielen ahead of him. Thielen should be the wide receiver 1. He should get a ton of targets. I would have taken him. I was mainly concerned about health. Tyler Lockett, I think, is a solid pick. And Calvin Ridley is a steal at the end of the 4th round, in my opinion. We're almost out of time, but Sean, give us your final thoughts on round 4.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying with Gurley. I think there's no ifs about it. He definitely has arthritic knees. He's definitely the definition of a boom or bust pick. He could be anywhere from 0 to one of the best backs in the league. Stephon Diggs over Adam Thielen has always been a mistake in fantasy football. Thielen was always the number one wide receiver in Minnesota. Although am interested to see what Diggs does in a new situation. I know that I knocked DeAndre Hopkins for going to a new team earlier, but in the case of Diggs, he clearly wasn't clicking, with the powers that be there in Minnesota. So I think the change of scenery is definitely going to do him some good. Good enough to be drafted over Adam Thielen? I don't think so, but time will tell. I like Ridley a lot better than Lockett as well. I think Ridley is the guy who could be this year's Chris Godwin in going from a 4th, 5th round receiver to being a guy who puts up first, second round production.
Sure thing. And in previous years, Lockett has been value and money, typically where he's drafted. But if I'm understanding, you're saying that Ridley's arrow is pointing up and Lockett's arrow may be plateaued or pointing down.
Yeah, Lockett might not even be the best receiver on his team anymore.
Which could help him. But he is sort of a possession receiver, although he is surprisingly a playmaker as well. But Ridley has that amazing speed, and he could be. He's obviously not going to draw the double coverage behind Julio Jones. So if Julio Jones stays healthy, Ridley could be a monster threat. Well, we're just about out of time, so we will follow this up with another video covering rounds 5 through 8, and we'll get all the way through this draft and help you out with your picks for best ball. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.